We hit on them briefly going into the break, and I think the team that maybe is the most intriguing in the Big Ten this year, Wes, is Penn State. Depending on who you talk to, this is a team that some people have power rated top 7, top 6 in the country, dynamic backfield, very solid offensive line. What will be the quarterback position? Win total sitting at 9.5. You look at the look-ahead markets right now, 10-point underdog on the road at Ohio State October 21st, 2.5-point underdog against Michigan. And one thing to note there, that will not be a whiteout game. The whiteout game this year will be Penn State, Iowa, September 23rd. Big noon kickoff will be Michigan and Penn State, which I think is an unfortunate situation there for the Nittany Lions. So you mentioned it briefly going to break. Win total sitting at 9.5. Pretty manageable non-conference schedule. West Virginia, where they're about a 3-touchdown favorite. Week number 1, primetime game in State College. They get FCS Delaware, and then they play UMass, who, best of luck to the Minutemen. I wrote them up for the guide. Win total of 2. So you do with that for what you will. Manageable there. Crossover with Iowa. Do not get Wisconsin. We know they play, of course, Michigan and Ohio State. Can this team get the double-digit wins for a second straight year?
Absolutely, and I went ahead and bet them over. I think that they can not only do that, I think that they can win the Big Ten, and I think that they could be in the college football playoff and have bet them accordingly. Just kind of ending off last season, they reemerged 11-2 season, won that Rose Bowl over Utah, and I was actually very impressed. Even though Penn State had a little bit more talent than Utah, I don't think they won it on athleticism, Tim. If you watch that game, I think they out-toughed Utah, and you don't ever out-tough Utah. Yeah. Nobody out-toughs Kyle Whittingham's team, and Penn State did that, so that was a good buy sign for me because I'm like, okay, they're not as finesse as they've tried to be the last 2 years. They've got some old school, Penn State, Nittany Lion toughness here, but the downside, of course, last year in 2022 was the fact that they got swept by Michigan and Ohio State for the second straight season. In fact, Franklin, 3-9 combined against Michigan and Ohio State since 2017. So to do what I expect them to do, you got to beat those teams. They're picked in their usual spot of third, but expectations are high with the 5-star Drew Aller taking over at quarterback. The running game, by the way, remember when Penn State a couple years ago, Tim couldn't run the ball? And it's like, what's going on at running back U there in State College? Well, questions have been answered. Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen almost had 2,000 yards between them and 22 touchdowns. They're behind a very strong offensive line that returned 6 guys that started at least 5 games last year, including Olu Fashanu at left tackle. Remember that name if you're an NFL draft follower.
He'll be the first tackle.
Yeah, he will be very early in the first round in 2024, which I think is music to Drew Aller's ears, who takes over for Clifford. I mentioned in the last break, Clifford, 4 different offensive coordinators. Now you do have at least some stability with Mike Yursich there for his second year as offensive coordinator. They've got to develop some receiver depth, but they went to the portal to go ahead and do that. They got Dante Cephas from Kent State, Malik McClain out of Florida State. The leading returning receiver is Keandre Lambert-Smith, who you look at the stats, didn't really do a ton because he was playing behind a couple guys that are now playing in the National Football League, but had an 88-yard touchdown catch in the Rose Bowl against Utah, and they've always been good at tight end. They'll be good with Theo Johnson and Tyler Warren. So I have a lot of confidence in Drew Aller going into this season and in this team in general.
Let's go in the weeds, baby, because what happens if Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan all finish 7-1 in conference play? What do we do? Well, let's go to the old Big Ten rule book here. The records of the 3 or more teams will be compared based on the best cumulative conference winning percentage of non-divisional opponents. So who do you play from the West if you're looking to get into the futures market? And if we do have a situation where all 3 play round robin, so Penn State, they get Illinois, Northwestern, and Iowa. Michigan gets Nebraska, Minnesota, and Purdue. And Ohio State from the West, they get Purdue, they get Wisconsin, and they also get Minnesota. So, take that for what you will if you're thinking about playing a future here. But you mentioned it, and real quick, just to kind of reiterate, and as mentioned, we'll hit on the favorite bets to end it. What would you prefer? Penn State to make the playoff, which I think is around 3 or 4 to 1.
Yeah.
Or Penn State to win the Big Ten, which you can get as high as 6 to 1 at DraftKings.
I prefer the Big Ten bet at 6 to 1, obviously, because with that tiebreaker you mentioned, you're splitting hairs if they all tie, but it seems like Penn State may be slightly easier out of the West, being that they do avoid Wisconsin, who we'll get to in a moment, who I consider still the number one team in the West, even with a lot of turnover. But yeah, I think, look, now is the time for Penn State, and they showed the toughness and more physicality late in the season. I think that Michigan game, because the Ohio State game was a lot closer than the final score indicated, and actually Penn State led, I believe, going into the fourth quarter. The Michigan game, they kind of got out toughed a little bit at the line of scrimmage. So I think that maybe the light bulb finally went off for Franklin and that staff. Hey, we got to be a little bit tougher at the line of scrimmage. They certainly were on defense, and what I thought was one of the better hires last year of any coach was Manny Diaz as defensive coordinator. 7 starters, by the way, back on that defense. They were top 10 nationally in points allowed, yards per play, red zone defense, takeaways, opponent completion percentage, and second nationally also in pass efficiency defense. So they do lose some personnel in the secondary to the NFL, but I think that they're going to be fine. I think they bring back like 10 of their top 12 linemen.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.